from that same room we saw a so-called doodlebug coming over and heading towards our area. And as we had acres and acres of glass houses for tomatoes and cucumbers which they grew on the farm, if anything had crashed into those, the glass would have shattered and gone for miles and caused a lot of damage. However, a British pilot, a British aircraft, a Spitfire I think, somehow nudged this bomb into the woods so that it didn't fall on the farm, it fell into nearby woods and saved us, I presume. So there's one pilot we'll never know who did a lot of good and never got any commendation for it, I presume. It was just part of his job. My father in the Home Guard had a lot of experiences, both serious, obviously, and funny. They were very prepared to give their lives if they had to. But on one occasion, they were being trained to use hand grenades because there were various plans on how, if the Germans invaded, they would attack secretly from woods. And so they had to learn to pull the pin out, count to 3, and then overarm throw the hand grenade to wherever it was intended to go. However, they were practicing behind a huge bank of earth to keep them safe. And so one by one they took their turn with a live grenade, pulled the pin out, 1, 2, 3, and threw it over this bank of earth so it exploded on the far side and everybody was safe. Kept their heads down, of course. However, we then got to the young boy who wasn't very bright and hadn't gone to war because he wasn't very bright. Nice young lad, but not very clever. Came to his term, he got the grenade, he pulled it out, 1, 2, 3, and threw it straight up in the air because he couldn't throw over. You've never seen men move so fast, my father said, in any direction except down. So there were things like that, which we all remember. We had a wedding from one of the Land Army girls, and she married one of the local men, as many of them did. And their wedding was carried out in the local church. She had a dress made out of a parachute, and the vehicle that brought her to the wedding and took everyone away was a farm horse and cart and wagon. And we all sat on the wagon and had a ride from the church. The bride and groom sat in the front with the driver, and it was lovely. But it was all that could be arranged at the time. No petrol, so it had to be the horse.
You hear a lot about Dunkirk spirit during the war. Did you, as a child, did you notice that people were particularly more community-minded than usual?
Well, I think so, because, well, I tell you one occasion, I had to go to school on the bus because I was about 7 or 8 miles out of the town. And one day we were told at school we had to bring our gas masks because we were going to do a practice with them the next day. And I thought, oh my goodness, they're going to put us into like a caravan thing full of gas, and we've got to walk. This is how I made it up in my head, because we were going to be tested with the gas masks. Well, I got on the bus at 8 o'clock in the morning, went down the road about 300 yards, and I yelled, "Stop!" And the bus driver, bless his heart, stopped. And I ran up the bus and said, "Wait for me, I've forgotten my gas mask, I'll die." So I ran all the way home, collected my gas mask, but as I was going back towards the bus, not only had he waited for me, he'd reversed up the road to meet me. Well, you wouldn't find that these days, would you?
No, you wouldn't. You mentioned that you knew somebody who received a white feather because they were...
My father, yes, because my cousin was an only son, and his mother obviously was upset when he was called up and went to war, but as did 2 of my father's brothers, so, you know, they weren't alone. She met him in the high street in the village and gave him 3 white feathers and said, "You won't go to war. My son could be killed. My son can't sleep with his wife or have babies or things. You can." So my father said, "Oh yes, in that case I won't." My brother was born 9 months after the end of the war.
Right. So, yeah, well,
so I think he kept his word.
He did his bit. Now, you play Flo or Nan in the play. Are there any sort of parallels in Nan's situation on the farm in Devon that you can think of with your experiences when you were a child?
Well, not being moved from home, but having people moved in. Like, my mother was very house proud. In fact, quite often I hear myself speaking and I think, oh my gosh, that's Mum. She's a very similar character, very house proud, and when she had to have these dirty evacuees in, that was awful for her. She cleaned them up, send them home for a weekend, and they'd come back in the same condition, etc. The Land Army girls were obviously very nice young women, but they weren't used to living in the country and having dirty clothes and boots and things like this, and she found it very hard to have people living in her house with her. But of course there were advantages. We got extra rations. We were never short of butter or other products, and of course we had lots of rabbit pies and stews and things like that, which in fact I even had my own pet rabbit who was called Shirley, and she was a beautiful grey fluffy rabbit. And one Christmas I had a beautiful pair of grey fur gloves given to me, and I knew exactly what they were. I cried and cried. I still have one of them today.
And did you eat Shirley then?
I must have, but I didn't realise it.
Realise
I didn't know it at the time. Shirley had just gone, and other rabbits were there. But I realised when I got these gloves, that's my Shirley, and I thought they were very cruel. But I understand now. And rabbit stew is still my favourite.
Really?
Yeah.
One of the things that Flo says in the play is that she likes listening to Lord Haw-Haw. Were you aware of any propaganda broadcasts?
Not at the time, no, because I was always in bed, I suppose. If he was on at 10 o'clock, as Flo says, then I was way into bed long before that. Children in those days went to bed after supper, and certainly in the country I did. So no, I wasn't aware. Propaganda, yes, I have seen leaflets floating down from an aeroplane. Don't remember much about them. I do remember one of the Land Army girls we had staying with us had a boyfriend, a fiancé he was actually, who was a rear gunner in a Lancaster bomber. And because he was in the rear, that's the area that got shot at most, and very few of them survived. But Uncle Ches did. But he was left with this condition, looking out into the dark, staring, tensed up into the dark. And I used to say, why does he always blink all the time? And Mummy said, well, that's because he has to look into the dark a lot from the aeroplane, so he can see the enemy and shoot them. And I used to think, that's funny, why shoot people? But anyway, after the war, it took about 5 or 6 years, but he did gradually stop. The blinking stopped once he had finished this.